Team Solo Mid, TSM, are one of the biggest Western teams in League of Legends. And due to the fact that so much fan interest, so many people who watch the game on the professional level, watching professional League of Legends, are from the West anyway, Europe and North America. That makes them, as a result, one of the biggest teams in all of League of Legends. And since League of Legends is arguably the biggest esport game, that makes them perhaps even the most popular team in all of esports. You could certainly make the case. Obviously, that could be debated. Maybe it's like Optic from Call of Duty. You've got other teams, but they're definitely up there. And particularly in League of Legends, they're a phenomenon in terms of the sheer number of fans they have, the sheer number of different countries their fans come from. In that sense, they actually remind me a bit of Manchester United, because the famous trope with Manchester United is because they were so successful in the 90s in terms of winning championships, that the football club I'm talking about here, you could actually go to somewhere like Bangladesh and you would see a little boy there who's never been to England, but he has a Manchester United jersey on. That's how far-reaching the fandom was of Manchester United. And there's a similar kind of vibe about TSM in that sense. So as one of the biggest teams in the whole world in this sense, they're one of the few teams who has very little interaction with the main media of esports. General journalists out there, people doing in-depth features. And when this is brought up, or whenever it's mentioned, or whether it's debated, there's often this claim put out there, which seems to be almost accepted as a kind of a consensus, it appears from the opinions I've read, month after month, year on year. The kind of the thought people seem to have and claim is that the reason why you don't see much of this stuff is because TSM don't need the media. They're so big as an organization and so famous in terms of their players, and they have media devices, they have like vlogs, they have their YouTube channels, they have their Twitter, they have their Twitch streams, that as a result they don't need anyone else. That these other people would only be gaining from them. And now this claim is usually made by either fans of TSM, often in particular situations where it's like, why won't TSM do interviews with this person, or why don't they go on this show, or this is the other person who tends to be the other category of person who will make this claim. People who are esports journalists, or journalists in some senses, but they're rookies. I don't know why I said that way. They've only been in the scene for maybe a year, 6 months. They've got a little bit of experience, and so maybe they talk as though they're experts, but actually they haven't been on the scene much. They don't know that much about the mechanics of how these things work. Now, the reason why I make this point or why I'm going to address this point, this claim that they don't need the media, is because not only is it presented that they don't need the media, but that second part that I said is always then presented as the prevailing thought, that the reason why anyone would suggest they need the media is because the media would only be the ones who'd benefit from working with TSM. So someone who did an interview with them would get the hits for the interview, they'd get the ad revenue for that, they'd maybe increase their own exposure as a journalist, become more famous, become known by the TSM fan base, they become more liked. As a result, maybe they'd get more interviews elsewhere. This is the kind of prevailing thing. So the idea presented is that not only TSM not need anyone, but everyone else needs TSM to a degree, and everyone else would benefit from TSM while TSM wouldn't benefit at all. Now, before I go into this topic, I just want to clarify that TSM don't have to do interviews with me, with any journalist in esports, anyone in any form of media. That is not what this video is about. They're entirely within their rights to pick and choose who they work with, as I actually personally would prefer every pro gamer and every pro gaming team to be. I don't think anyone should be obligated to do interviews with everyone. That's actually an approach in modern sports I'm not that big a fan of. I don't think even that gets such good results, like forcing people to do press conferences and giving the media responsibilities where teams find the players if they won't do them. I'm not a fan of that personally. Now, with that said, also, along those lines, actually, I have a policy, in fact, to go along with this and to kind of encourage what I think is you should freely choose who you work with. I actually have a personal policy, which I've stuck by my whole career, where I never reveal any player or team who don't want to do interviews with me. As in, if I ask a player, like, hey, do you want to do an interview with me? And they say, nah, I'm not interested, or like, I don't think I could do it, or whatever. I don't say, like, okay, but then go away, and then later on, even if a fan just asks me, hey, have you ever going to do an interview with that player? I won't be like, oh, I asked him and he said no. Because unfortunately, if I was to do so, it seems fairly meaningless, it feels kind of harmless, It's not like that I've been held to a secret here, this wasn't any kind of pact. But the reason I don't do it personally is I don't want that player to then be hassled by fans, if we're talking about coming on a talk show, or that fan to then go to the player like, oh, why won't you do that? I don't want it to be any more hassle for this player, I asked him if he'd do cooperate with me on something, collaborate on something, an interview. He chose not to. That's absolutely fine with me. I don't have an issue. I won't bring it up. I won't berate them about it. It's not an issue at all for me. Now then, the reason why this video is being created, though, is because I want to dismiss, dissect, and examine that claim that TSM don't need the media need TSM, the media only gain, TSM gains nothing. Because built within that are a lot of preconceptions about how the industry works, which are absolutely alien to me and in fact seem almost objectively incorrect. So, okay, let's start with this claim. When people say, they don't need the media, it's never then just presented how I presented theirs, or they don't need the media because, they just choose not to work with the media. They don't like the media. They don't like doing interviews, all these things. No. What people always say within the claim, this is always a part of it. A secondary component is always because they can do their own media. They can handle their own obligations. They can do all these things. Okay, let's see if that's true. So can TSM do their own interviews? So first type of interview, post-match interview. Can they produce their own interviews? They certainly could. They could hire a journalist to do it. They could do an interview after every match in the same style even as maybe someone like a Travis would do in a post-game. They could have even players interview each other, whatever they could do. They don't do that. If they can do that, then apparently they don't think it's important and they don't do that. And so as a result, you don't get to see those interviews. Yes, they produce their reality TV show, TSM Legends, which is interesting, and that has snippets of post-game interviews, but they're not the same as a post-game interview, really. They're not like an in-depth post-game interview, what are we doing at this moment, why did you do that, by a professional interviewer who's trained to do this, has experience, has interviewed many people, understands the techniques of interviewing. That's not going on here. You're not getting that same vibe. Likewise, long-form interviews. So obviously this is one of my specialties, the Reflections, the Grilled series, where you sit someone down, you've had time to go up over past interviews, think about what you can ask them. You try to get really deep in the topics, ask about past teams, players they played, big matches, their philosophy on the game, ideas of where they want to go in their career, how they interpret certain things that happened to them. All the kind of, to me, the really interesting interview themes and kind of topics you can get into. They could produce these again. They could also do this. They could even hire another journalist in the scene to do this. They don't, though. They do not do these types of interviews. This does not happen. You will not see long-form interviews like this. I hope you could. I wish they would hire someone. Get some guy maybe we don't even know, just has some interviewing skills. Maybe he's done a year in university on a journalism course. Get him to do this stuff. It'd be great, just as the post-match interview. But they don't do these things. Now, they do. I've looked on their channel. They do interviews in the sense that they have videos called Ask TSM, where people can, essentially fans can ask TSM questions. Now, the problem with this, as anyone who's ever read an AMA will know, the majority of AMAs are crap on both ends. Now, on the first end, they're crap because the fans, in general, don't tend to ask very good questions. Now, every now and then someone will make a very good question, or they'll do a really awesome post and people will gild it, etc. But in general, most fans don't ask good questions. Like they're not sure what to ask. If they know what to ask, they're not sure how to ask it. If they know how to ask it, maybe even then they know generally how to ask it. They don't know specifically to that player, and because they haven't got any mastery of the craft of interviewing, of journalism in this sense. They don't have experience doing it. They don't know how to work into a question. So if you ask one question directly in a blunt manner, a player might shy away from it, might not respond to it. Whereas actually, if you ask in a different manner, so that you set it up that, listen, we're both on the same side here, we're trying to work as a team to get to this interesting information. No one's going to force you to say anything, but I think there's an interesting topic here, and they set it up here, so here's something we talk about first, which leads into this. And if that exists there, then what do you think about this? Then in this kind of a manner, they might open up. They might actually decide to address that. They might think, I'm not being attacked here. And they might answer in a very interesting, different way than they would if they just had it in an AMA, in a video. And in fact, most AMAs and videos, if you think of how they tend to go, the question tends to be fairly simplistic and the answer tends to be fairly simplistic. People often wondered why in my Grilled and Reflections, some of the questions were so long. The question was longer than the answer. Well, that's because when you go back and look at the answers, yeah, it might seem like the question was too long, but the answer might be not as long, but much longer than the answer would be if I'd just boiled what my question was down to one sentence with 10 words. Then I haven't given him all these options as to where to go with this, subtext, background information, some flavor on kind of like the world I'm setting forth here, jogging his memory sometimes, so that then it seems as though, he remembers it all, but actually I'm kind of getting him going. I've had players tell me after my interviews sometimes, like, I didn't think I remembered all that stuff. But when you asked me in that way, suddenly I could remember it, and I could remember the details, and I was putting myself in that position. I could feel what it was like to feel that, and remember even the score of something happening. So that's part of the reason. It's part of the craft. I understand why people watching the interviews don't understand this stuff, but it's part of the craft you build up as to how to do it. It's your own techniques of what get a good interview. Unfortunately, fans aren't very good at this. I mean, for obvious reasons. They're just fans. They haven't put any time into this. They haven't thought about this stuff. So AMAs, these Ask ETS, they're never going to be as good as any of the interviews we're talking about here, even a post-game interview, even a long-form interview. Now, They do vlogs. Okay, so a vlog's a way to get some stuff out there, right? Their thoughts about things. Now, the problem here is the other side of the AMA thing. Remember I said there was two sides that AMAs are crap from. They're crap from the fans asking questions because fans aren't particularly good at asking questions. They also tend to be crap from the player end because players aren't good at answering questions. Players don't always know what they think about a topic. Players don't know how to frame how they think about a topic. They don't know the perspective of like, okay, when you say that and I answer in this way, what context do I need to add so you actually understand what I'm saying, as opposed to me just assuming that a very simple thing I say, you know exactly what that means. They don't know what extra details you need from me if I'm the person answering so that you can get the full grasp of this, or why I think a certain way, not just what I think. There's a big difference between that. A lot of my interview questions are, why do you think this way? Or what do you think? A lot of the way people answer and a lot of the way AMA questions are asked tends to be, what do you think? Which can be very simple. And also, more importantly, like, what do you feel? How did you feel? Mine are more like, what do you think? How do you think about this? What philosophy informed that? Why do you think that way? Is there something that led you to? It's a different type of world. You're going for the same sorts of topics and answers and area. You're in the right area, but it's the way that you go about it that's going to get the different results. So vlogs famously are terrible for getting this information out. I've watched a lot of vlogs, and vlogs are a TSM tradition, actually, going way back to season 1, season 2. It's one of the things that made their media exposure so big and made them such a famous team. It was not just the streaming and being a good team, but they went hard on blogs in the early days. Now, one of the terrible things about blogs, if you've watched any of them, vlogs rather, is that they tend, quite frankly, to be boring as fuck. Like, they're unstructured, they tend to be meandering, the players aren't particularly articulate, they can sometimes be incoherent, like they lose track of their point, or they get to the end of the point and you're like, what was the point there? You know, you just kind of, you went somewhere, but I'm not sure where you came from, what you were trying to accomplish there, and where you ended up. A vlog, since it's just the person talking, he turns on his camera, talks to 20, they tend not to be very probing, because in an interview, if the person says something, sometimes I can just cut right in there where I can tell they're going into a boring area and go, but what about this though? And probe a little deeper and see if actually we can be more incisive with the question, rather than leaving it too open-ended that they waffle around and give you some vague stuff and never get to kind of the real point that you want to discuss here. That's one of the problems with vlogs, again, because players haven't mastered the grasp of speaking, of being articulate, being eloquent. They haven't actually learned how to structure their thoughts to be able to deliver them in a manner which makes sense and is coherent and consistent and actually is informed by their philosophy of life, which they could then articulate to you as well and give you examples from their life and illustrations to make a point. They just tend to say things and hope that you know what they're like as a person and you get it. So again, vlogs aren't the same as interviews. Now, they also, I've noticed, do interviews sometimes with sponsors, such as HyperX, a fun series actually called 20 Questions with a Player. I've seen them do it with Cloud9 players, TSM players. Now, essentially, we'll put this in the category of sponsor interviews. The problem is, those are purposely light-hearted. They're purposely fun. They're not interviews in the sense I'm talking about here. It's very specific things about a game or long-form interviews about a career and in-depth, deep stuff. It's supposed to be light-hearted. It's supposed to be fun because essentially it's supposed to be a bit of fun fluff. If you like the personality of the player, with the background concept of it's putting into your mind you're associating the fact you like this player and it's a fun brand, fun questions with the brand, with the company who sponsor this player as well and make it possible for you to run all that stuff. It's marketing. There's something fun about it. You get something for it. You get a little treat, but there's something behind it as well. Now, the reason why I bring all this up is because the claim was not only can they do their own things, but they'll work with their own partners. Now, that's not really the case. Like, I've looked online. I've tried looking this year. You can find the odd interview. Like, I saw some at IEM World Championship that they did with some people. Every now and then, you'll see an interview with a different... Like, there's been 1 or 2 post-match at LCS, but it's not the same as, like, Travis doing a post-match after every big LCS game that's interesting in his style, with his sense of humour, knowing the personality of the player. It's not the same as if you have imagine this year if we'd had a Direst Reflections or Bjergsen Reflections, and we could we could ask him the tougher questions, or we could get his perspective on this difficult period and on the successes and how he's adjusted. We don't get that kind of content. And I'm not talking about as in imagine it has to be my series. We don't get any of that type of content from TSM and from TSM players. I'm talking mainly, by the way, about League of Legends here. So, okay. Let's look at it from the media point of view now. So I'll actually use my own case here. My own case doesn't apply to other people because, as I mentioned when I was setting this up, obviously there will be less famous media where just getting an interview with a TSM player raises their exposure level, gets them known by that fan base, maybe gets people to check out other work they've done, helps them get other interviews in the scene. Now, none of those things apply to me. I've been around the scene so long and I've interviewed so many players that essentially, if I ask a player to do an interview with me, he's not going to do one on the basis that I did one with Dyrus. First of all, I've already done one with Dyrus, and I've done tons throughout the season. I've done like hundreds of interviews. It's also not the case that doing an interview with Dyrus is going to make my profile bigger. It's pretty much capped out almost at how big it can be. I'm also not going to make Dyrus' profile bigger. We're both sort of capped out in that sense. So really, realistically, what do I lose out by not getting TSM interviews? Well, first of all, I don't do post-match interviews. I only do the Reflections Grill type. So in terms of that, all I've lost is Reflections and Grill. And if you know the kind of schedule I was on with those, at most, I only tend to do one every sort of year and a half with players. Like most of them I've only done once in Grilled, and I've only done once in Reflections. So most of these players on that type of interview, I've only maybe interviewed twice ever. So those sorts of players, really, I'm not losing a lot of interviews now. I'm losing, let's say there's 5 of them, and obviously they change players. So let's say they've had, well, no, I guess because if a player leaves, I can interview him anyway, so that's not an issue. Okay, so let's say they're 5 players they have now. Let's realistically say that over a 2-year span, I want to interview all of them twice, which is actually unlikely, but let's say. So I've lost between 5 and 10 interviews. Out of the hundreds of interviews I produce every single, out of the hundreds of videos I produce every year, maybe 50 to 60 interviews I do every year, hundreds of articles, I've lost 5 to 10 pieces of content in that sense. Now that, unfortunately, I have to tell you this, that will have zero impact on my earnings, on my prestige as a journalist, or actually on my satisfaction as a journalist. Now what I mean by that is, if I don't do the interview with the TSM member, I've got limited time. I'm on a schedule with a different member as well. So I don't know what you know about ad revenue from actual videos on YouTube. You don't earn that much. Like the difference between a 100,000 hit video, which a TSM member might get, and let's say a 60,000 hit video, which let's say a member of a team like Team Liquid might get. They might get 100,000 as well, but let's imagine their fan base is smaller. So we're talking about a 40% decrease in hits. That might realistically, put it this way, that's going to be, I won't say the exact figure because I guess you shouldn't say that sort of thing because you have contracts with the people who you do ad revenue. So I'll just say a rough figure. Put it this way, that's going to be less than, like say $40 to $50 out of my pocket. It's going to be less than that. So it's not going to be very much at all. And remember, since I'm only going to do 5 or 10 of these videos in a whole year, max, we're talking about like what? Not a whole lot, right? Like $500, $200 over a whole year. So actually that's quite inconsequential to me. And then secondly, the prestige aspect. Now I'm going to interview lots of great players, lots of interesting players anyway. I'm not only going for the biggest ones anyway, so I'm not going to lose out in that sense. Now in terms of satisfaction, that's the one where it is a slight exaggeration to say I have zero loss of satisfaction from it. Because obviously someone like Bjergsen, I would actually be quite interested to interview. Someone like Dyrus, because I've always wondered what his perspective was on it. I've always respected how he's been able to put up with certain aspects of abuse or being underappreciated. But some of the other members don't particularly care about. And the reason why I did say I wouldn't be a loss of satisfaction is because, again, since I know I can't interview these players and they won't do interviews with me, I don't think about it. And as a result, when I have time free, when I do an interview, I do an interview with someone else who interests me, someone else who's fascinating. Sometimes that might be a player, by the way, who's not even famous on the level of a TSM player. There's some people I'm very interested in, someone like Clement Chu, who isn't going to get hundreds of thousands of hits. The guy's fucking fascinating. So I'm sorry, he's actually more fascinating to me than Dyrus is, but I would get an interest out of that. So it's even less on the satisfaction one. On the prestige and the owners one, it doesn't really impact it a whole lot. Because, first of all, I'm not doing this as my main job. I don't make my living off doing interviews, by the way. There's very much a side thing that I do now for fun. My primary earnings, 90% plus, in fact more, 95, 99% of my earnings do not come from the interviews that I put on YouTube. So I wouldn't lose very much in that sense. Now, what about members appearing on Summoning Insight? I get next to nothing from pure ad revenue of Summoning Insight. I make money from sponsorship. That sponsorship does not change depending on the guests we have. If you ever go and look at the episodes of Summoning Insight, we have many, many episodes where we, maybe because of scheduling, we didn't have a guest that week. It's just me and Monty. And we got more hits than episodes that had some quite famous players on. Some star players, some world famous players. We've had episodes that get more hits just with us. So I don't lose any earnings there. And also, just purely from the episodes. Remember, we're only doing, like, at most 4 episodes a month. And let's say an episode, I think the best an episode ever does is probably like 150k. Probably more reasonable is between like 80 and 100k. Again, in terms of ad revenue, that's going to be less than about that's less than $200. It's much less actually. So $200, let's just hypothetically say that $200 4 times a month, $800, and that's assuming that I split it with Monty. So there's $400 each we're making per month from Summoning Insight. And that's if TSM members would somehow boost the amount. Well, they don't. They would probably get about the same amount. Because actually, there's not really a rhyme or reason as to how the guest seems to impact the number of views, amazingly. Like, there's episodes with, like, Kelsey Moser, who people would think is boring and it wasn't interesting. She's way higher than some mega players who you'd be like, what the fuck? Like, I think she was higher than, like, Forgiven or someone who everyone always says, oh, those were the best episodes. And had all the funny moments in them, whereas those were more pure, dry analysis, which I love as well in its own right. So again, not losing a whole lot of money there. The show's already a runaway success in that regard. And also, much like with the interviews, there are no end of guests that you can book for Summoning Insight. Not least because since we're not doing it to purely make money, we don't get make money directly based on the hits. We can invite who we want and who we want to talk to, who we think would be interesting. So if we don't get a TSM member, which it'd be cool, obviously, to have Bjergsen or something like that, we get someone else who it's interesting at. We do get a Clement Chu type guy. We get a player from Europe. We get Crumbs or someone, There's all these players. We will never run out of guests for Summoning Insight. There's so much, because we only do at most 52 shows in a year. Probably not even that many, to be honest. Probably more like 45 to 50. So we can only have 50 people in a whole year, and that's assuming we don't double up. So that's not an issue there. I don't really lose out in that sense. Now then, what do the fans lose? I notice the fans are never the ones brought into this, because what's funny is sometimes it's fans making this claim. So when they claim TSM doesn't need the media, they can do their own interviews, they can work with their own partners, what's funny is the same fan doesn't seem to realise he's the one losing out. Because what fans lose out from, in my particular case, I'm going to go in my case each time because I can talk to the specifics of this. I can tell you vaguely for other people, but I don't know specifically how it would impact them if it was Bjergsen in their interview or if it was some player from Renegades, Now, what the fans lose when TSM won't do an interview with me, for example, so my Reflections interview, is they lose an interview in my series, in my style, with their favourite players, if they happen to be TSM players. They can't see those anymore. So the guy out there who's a fan of TSM and wants to see an interview with me, doesn't necessarily even like me, he doesn't get to see that interview now. The guy who's a fan of me and TSM doesn't get to see that interview. The guy who's a fan of me, maybe isn't even a fan of TSM, but would have watched it anyway, he doesn't get to see that interview. Those three groups of people do not get satisfaction in that sense. Likewise, the guy who's a fan of Summoning Insight, for just TSM, for TSM and Summoning Insight, for us and TSM and some guy, they don't get any satisfaction. They don't get anything. They lose out completely on what they could have had. Also, in terms of fans, I think that fans lose out on getting to know the players more because of both of these aspects. Look how well it goes with the majority of teams and players who are represented on Summoning Insight. Their fans like seeing a different side of them, getting to see them joke around, getting to see them sometimes confronted on issues, getting to see them sometimes go back and forth. Do they have a bit of spunk to them, a bit of fight? Are they someone who prefers to just roll with the jokes? How will they answer if you put a kind of a jibe at them about a loss they had? Will they be able to take it all right? Will they lose all of this extra side to the person that you get to see that you wouldn't see even in a mainstream interview or a TSM show interview. You'd get a different flavour to it because they're interacting with different people. They wouldn't be interacting with me or Monty or whoever. Now, here's the question people don't ask. Because they say TSM doesn't need it and that only the media gains, they don't ask what TSM loses by these kind of not working with people in the media. So again, I'll use my example. First and foremost, believe it or not, this will sound funny to some people. They lose a chance to have better PR, public relations for their player. Now people are going to be like, what are you talking about? The show's got like trash talking and joking and swear words on, and sometimes you might talk trash about another person and someone might like that and it might be controversial and edgy. No, here's the thing. In general, with very few exceptions, the majority of people who do my Reflections interviews and come on Summoning Insight, the public leaves with a more positive view of that person. They feel like they get to know the person a bit more. If the person was viewed as toxic before or had extreme opinions, now when they're forced to answer a bit more or they're put in a joking environment, you see that, oh, actually this guy's, maybe he's toxic to some degree in some competitive sense, but actually he's got a cool personality, or in the case of someone like Forgiven, I can see he really wants to win and that he doesn't accept bullshit. He's just that sort of a guy. And if you'd known that before, you probably wouldn't have been as outraged before when you'd heard about the toxicity, that sort of thing. So getting to know the other side of them, that's positive for the player and for his team. They're getting repped a lot better. That's why a lot of orgs out there when I talk to them about doing interviews with their players, etc., they'll actually tell me like, oh yeah, actually, that's one of the reasons I kind of do let them go on your show, because even if there is like there will be the odd joke and all that sort of thing, I think overall, because it's you deal with them quite fairly and you try to help them express themselves, etc., it's going to be a plus. It's going to be a net plus at the end for them and for the org and the brand. It's going to show that, you know, they can take a joke. They're going to just feel like a member of the community instead of this like guy on a pedestal as a player. And if he says anything edgy in isolation, can be just knocked down, tearing apart. There's also the situation that as a result of this, they don't get to show off a better side in certain cases. Like, I'll give you a great example. Is this, you still see it every now and then. There's a sort of fan, it's often a TSM fan, but there's sometimes fans of other teams. There's a type of a TSM fan who somehow is a fan of TSM, but kind of isn't really a fan of Bjergsen. Like when they see him on TSM Legends, or he loses and he seems like he was really angry, or he didn't trust something about the team concept and went against it and tries to carry himself, they're like, oh, this guy's so arrogant. Like, he's so entitled. Like, who does he think he is? You know, he's just like being brought into this team and he's been given so much. Like, how dare he do these things? How dare he talk to his coach that way? They think of him as arrogant, right? In my career, I'm almost a specialist at getting that sort of personal reflections interview, or that sort of person on Summoning Insight, and showing you a different side to them, showing you that some of that exists, but it's been refracted through a very limited prism to you. This one interaction, or this third-party source, or this story from someone else. You don't get to see what they're like directly and see some interaction with them and see them brought up on some of these topics, see how they think about it and what their reasoning is maybe, and things that have happened to them that have put them in this position and how they came to think about life this way. I'll give you some great examples. So Forgiven's a really good one. People were going so hard on this guy after his Copenhagen Wolves split. And I talked to him and I'd done interviews with him. I knew this was a guy where if you got to know him in a different way, he's a funny guy actually. And then even the things that seem toxic from one side, they have this underlying aspect that in its own way is positive and it's kind of admirable, like the dedication to want to do it. And also to be the guy that if you really are the best and you're working harder than everyone and that you're battling to destroy this person, you're not going to be like, hey, he's a very good player. You're going to be, I fucking crush him and I will kill him next time I play him. There's something cool, refreshing about that. But it has to be presented in a certain way. And that player often doesn't know how to get that across, or doesn't know what the gap is between how he perceives himself and how the public's perceiving him. And he even gets frustrated because of that and comes off as even more toxic. So Forgiven's a great example. Soaz is a great one. Remember how people were talking about Soaz after that All-Stars tournament in 2014 where Fnatic shit the bed. People were going in on this guy. That's why he was lashing out at people on Twitter. Every time he comes on Summoning Insight, it's funny. You get to see this other side to him. You can see why his teammates love him, why he is treated as kind of a brilliant but a bit eccentric guy, because he is as a person, and it's reflected in his game. And once you know that, it kind of makes a lot more sense, and you can take the positives. You don't just only look at the negatives. So I think definitely it would show off a better side to them. It's more exposure in general. I mean, my interviews, some of them get 100,000 hits. You're not getting as many as that with some less famous people. That's just a fact of exposure. You're also exposure in terms of Summoning Insight. Again, you might be getting out to 100,000 people that week. You're getting out to some people, by the way, who might not even follow your brand, might not follow TSM media. But this is a more generalized media in that sense. Fans of all teams are watching it. Maybe fans who aren't fans of TSM and Bjergsen, who think that he's an asshole, maybe because he beats their team, or they just don't like the way that, and maybe their team has the Cloud9 players who are more humble. Maybe they get to know it and they go, you know what? Like, I still don't like TSM because let's say they're that sort of a fan. But, you know, actually Bjergsen's pretty cool. And I've got to admit, he's such a good player. Like, I can get why he has the frustrations. Likewise, along these topics, TSM, believe it or not, by not having players come do interviews with me or appear on Summoning Insight, literally lose a voice in those avenues, vehicles of media. So when I do an interview, I've done interviews with Dyrus, with Xpecial. If I ask them a question that's a tough question, and is it something that people who are critics of TSM think, or something that the community thinks that's negative about TSM? So for example, I've asked Xpecial in the past about when he was a player, like people perceive Reginald this way, or they perceived Chaos this way, or whatever it is. It gives them a chance to give their side and to go, oh, actually, here's the reason. I can see why people say that, but here's what I think. Or, oh, actually, I disagree with that. In fact, I didn't like something you said here, and then go into it in that sense. There's no one in my interviews has ever gotten up in the middle of an interview and said, I'm not answering these questions, I'm done, this is over. The way I present them and the way I talk with the person is, it's like, I don't think of it as like I'm versus them and I'm trying to beat them. It's a team aspect. We're both working to produce something. The interview, which is hopefully going to be a shared process whereby no one's being forced to say anything or saying anything they don't want to, but we're just trying to get to interesting topics, and we're going to do that as a team. I'm going to help them out there, and we're going to help them articulate. Hopefully, I'm going to help them not put themselves in a terrible position where they say something crazy, because if they do, I'm going to ask them follow-ups. I'm going to try and check that there's context to it, that it's not just a crazy statement, and give them a chance to explain themselves. I even tell all these interview subjects when I do the reflections and grilled. I tell them before we go live with the interview, like, listen, if you make a mistake or you accidentally say something the wrong way and you think it'll come across the wrong way, tell me right then. We'll cut the video there. I'll let you redo it, or we can ask the question in a different way, or we can even skip that if it's just an uncomfortable question that as you're talking about it, you're like, actually, I feel really uncomfortable. I don't want to answer this. I say, don't worry about that, and no one will ever hear about it. I'll never tell anyone that you dodged it in that sense or anything like that. That's something I do to work with these people. So they miss a chance to be fairly represented in that sense, because they can't give their side. They're mute in my interviews, in my shows. They can't appear because of the decree of the owner. It's also the case that in So Many Insight particularly, this is part of the reason why there's this perception that the show is so anti-TSM and it's so brutal to TSM. It's the one team that we go the hardest on. Think about it. That's because members of those teams of TSM never appear on So Many Insight. Now, technically, they haven't, as much as when Nick Special left, he went Liquid, he came on. But that doesn't really count in that sense. I'm using curse at the time. That doesn't really count to me. I'm talking about active members. Now, the reason why it doesn't seem like we're hostile against every other one. Now, there is an aspect, by the way, where we joke about the fact that TSM hates us because so many fans have inundated us all that. I'm talking like 99% of the abuse we've ever gotten for the show was from TSM fans. Literally, people were like, TSM logos telling you, fuck you, die, can't, I never watch your show, all that sort of stuff, was just all 99%. I'm not even exaggerating. But part of the reason for that is obviously, we jokingly do it because it's just part of the humor of the show. If you notice, the shows, a lot of it's referencing back to old jokes, because that's actually a comedy technique that I learned a long time ago from stand-up, where you reference something that was funny before and it kind of takes a little bit of the energy there, continues it on, and you get a momentum in the show that keeps things loose and keeps it fun and makes it feel like it's like an environment where everyone's comfortable. There's also the fact that we obviously some of us on the show don't like particular people in the TSM organization. That's very different though from our analysis. Like the fact that I dislike Reginald doesn't make me suddenly decide, right, you know what? Even though I think Briggson's a brilliant player, I'm going to find out a way to say that he's shit. Yeah, that'll teach them. I've never done that once in my life, mate. You can think otherwise. So the point I'm making here is the reason why it seems like they never get any of their side told out, because how the fuck can we know their side? They never come on the show. Everyone else comes on the show. Cloud9's now come on the show. Curse, Dignitas. Let me think. People who were in Coast before. People from Evil Geniuses. People from Complexity. Let me think. I guess we didn't have LMQ because they only spoke Chinese. Tons of Europeans, people from fucking Fnatic. Who else have we got? People who are in Origin now, people from NIP, Rockart, Copenhagen Wolves. I haven't had anyone from Giant Song because I don't know how good their English is. Presumably most of them speak Spanish. In general, we've had almost every LCS team or LCS caliber team and the star players of most of them on the show at some point in time. So even if, by the way, we've had on people who we do shit on, like some of them we think are bad players or we make fun of them the fact they're bad, we still have them on the show. And by the way, notice the episodes they come on. Yeah, we joke with them like that, but we never go like super hard at them or whatever. And we definitely give them a chance to answer back and a chance to give us different reasons. And sometimes you get sometimes a very interesting answer. Like people thought Nif was shit around the time he came on when he was in Elements. But if you heard some of his answers about how he was sometimes forced to play what was originally going to go top lane or mid as a flex flick in his position, or he's the one who has to give up champions he wants so people in his team stars can first pick something else. Now you know a different side of it. And you don't just think he's shit for that one reason that he's a bad player. Maybe know some of the context. So actually, the problem there is that TSM don't realize they just don't get a voice in it now because they've muted themselves. They don't allow themselves to have a voice. Because if someone comes on the show, we're not aside from people I know as friends, by the way, and I've known for many years, we're not going to just argue with that guy that he's wrong and tell him he's an idiot and he's wrong, just go with him for an hour. I only do that if it's someone I actually know on a personal level. If someone came on the show and said, I don't agree with that, I don't get that would essentially either be it or it'd go into a much more civil discussion and it'd move along as a topic. We never get to hear their side because how would we? And also, it's ridiculous to think that on an opinion talk show, we would stop our own opinion and go, oh, and by the way, even though I've just said that and I think that, let me think what someone else might think who's not me, who'd have a different opinion, and now I'll voice that even though I'm not that person. Now, that's not how it works. You can only have the opinions, the people who appear on the show, I'm afraid. That's the only reasonable way. And there's definitely no obligation that when we make the show, we have to give counter opinions to what we think. This is what we think. Someone comes on the show and says it, great, it's an opinion discussion show. We're not battling ourselves and trying to prove ourselves wrong in that sense. That's not really what's going on here. Trying to articulate our thoughts and why we think that way and see how our thoughts interact. So you can see with other teams, we have the back and forth. We don't with TSM because they muted themselves. Now, to reiterate some of these factors and to run through some of it, TSM, as I mentioned, definitely do not have to do interviews with me. In fact, if they never do an interview with me till the end of time, that's fine for them, it's fine for me, but that's a separate issue from whether they would gain something from it or whether they lose something by not doing so. That's a very separate issue that is definitely not joined up in that. So the fact they don't want to doesn't mean they don't lose something. That's a ridiculous notion. But in general as well, the idea that they don't need the media, that their fans don't need the media, is ridiculous, patently. As I've laid it out here, it's just clearly not the case. They and their fans lose out by not doing so. As a result, we don't have these cool post-game interviews every single match, every single big match. We don't have long-form interviews with TSM members. We don't have a TSM talk show. They have their own formats and they have their own media and they have their own partners. Where's the TSM talk show? I've seen Bjergsen appeared on one show. Was it Bjergsen? I think, yeah, he appeared on one show recently. Other than that, it's actually been quite rare that you ever even see a TSM members appear on talk shows. I mean, there aren't many talk shows, obviously, but they don't start their own TSM talk or whatever and do that every time. So actually, in almost every area you can conceive of, TSM loses out, the fans lose out. I lose out to a minor degree. I mean, mine's a different case, as I pointed out there. Certain other journalists would lose out a lot, and maybe that's why they do it, to make those journalists play ball. Although I guess not really, because they don't give anything back to them. In my sense, I don't lose out a whole lot. I maybe lose out a cool interview here and there, 5 of them in a year. Maybe lose out those 1 or 2 Some of the Insight episodes where I actually get to hear what the TSM player thinks. Maybe we lose out in that sense. But otherwise, I don't particularly lose a lot of money, don't lose any prestige, and lose only a little bit of satisfaction. I can go with my life and follow CS, follow Dota 2. I guess I only follow that as a viewer. I don't really do any work in it. Counter-Strike, Global Offensive, already said that. Quake, StarCraft 2 a little bit. And League of Legends, because we have every region, I have so many interviews. I will never get all the interviews done I want to. I'll never have all the people on talk shows I want to. I'll never be bored in this sense or run out of interesting people. So even as much as I lose out, it's not as much, actually, I think, when you weigh up the scales, as TSM fans lose out and TSM players and TSM org lose out to a degree. So as a general approach, again, they don't have to do interviews with anyone, but they definitely do lose out and they definitely cannot make up for it. And they definitely do need other people. Just as some media need them, TSM does need the media if they want to get these aspects of themselves shown and their story told. Thanks to Alpha Draft for providing the sponsorship so that I can do videos like this and actually earn some money like I wouldn't get from a TSM interview. You can play fantasy esports there, such as League of Legends, such as CSGO, such as Smite, such as Dota 2. Go to the link in the description box below if you indeed want to. Thank you, Alpha Draft, for the money.